Okay. The first one is number 1, aliyah. Okay, it's in Hebrew, the word aliyah, and it's an aliyah, that's how it's pronounced. Somebody who's invited to come up to the Torah to read from the Torah, they receive an aliyah. And so it literally means to go up, to ascend. And it could have two meanings. One is that you go up to a higher level when you come up to the Torah, but literally it's just that you go up in the bima, and you ascend to the bima, and you get an aliyah to the Torah. Another way that aliyah is used is when someone makes aliyah to Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the same idea, that you're going up, because Israel is considered like spiritually the highest location in
It's the
Judaism.
same word, because this
Exactly.
is what I heard more. Mm-hmm.
Number 13 is a Dvar Torah. Dvar Torah. Dvar means word. Torah means Torah. Okay? So it literally means a short talk someone delivers on Torah or Judaism. So if you're going to give a lecture, that's not really a Dvar Torah. Dvar Torah is something you fit in 5 or 10 minutes at a bris or between different prayer services. It's called a Dvar Torah. It's a word of Torah. Some rabbis make it many words of Torah, and the congregants get upset about that. But it really is a Dvar Torah, a word of Torah. Okay? Number 22, Kaddish. Okay? Kaddish means to sanctify. Literally, Kadesh means Kuf Dalet Shin is to sanctify. And we're really sanctifying God's name with this prayer. This is a prayer written in Aramaic, which is said by Jewish mourners. A different version of Kaddish is recited between sections of prayers during prayer services. So there are different types of Kaddishes. There are different, but the most popular one is the Kaddish that's said by people who are mourning for a loved one. And they'll come to synagogue and they'll say it at least one time a day or 3 times a day. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It's everyone familiar? Yiskadal v'yiskadash. Okay. Number 27 is leaning. Leaning. And that means, it's pronounced leaning, and it's from Yiddish, and it means to read from the Torah. So, hey, we need someone to lean. Can you lean from the Torah? Can you lean? So that's kind of how you say it. And what? So it's reading. So it's reading from the actual Torah scroll. Yeah.
It's like without vowels.
When you invite someone knows how to lean. They know how to read from the Torah scroll without the vowels, without the cannellation. They memorized it or whatever. That's what you did at your bar mitzvahs if you did read from the Torah. When you read from the Haftarah, it's not usually what they call leaning. It's usually reading from the Torah itself, not from other parts, like the 5 books of the Torah scroll. Okay. Number 33 is minyan. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, why am I'm talking about Kaddish, leaning, because all these are things were involved in the life cycles. When someone has a bar mitzvah, they lean from the Torah. When someone's family member passes away, God forbid, they say the Kaddish. Another thing you need for some of these some of these life cycle events are minyan. A minyan is a quorum of 10 in Orthodoxy male Jews, which is required in prayer service for public reading of the Torah or the recitation of mourners Kaddish. You need a certain amount of people to do some of these, because the idea is you need to have God's name is sanctified in the best way when you have a lot of people. And a lot of people is from 10 up. And so traditionally in Orthodoxy it was understood as 10 men, but other denominations have expanded it to other genders, the other gender. But we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so.
Do you know how come 10?
What?
Because it seems like 7's important.
7's an important number, yeah.
Yeah, but so 10.
So there's a technical answer to that, because there were 10 of the spies were called. They get it from 10 of the spies that went out, and they called them I think they called them like Eidah, and that's considered the Torah calls them like a gathering. Okay. And so from there, technically, we learn that a gathering is made up of 10. Okay. But that's a good question. 7 is a good number. I guess 10 is the beginning of larger numbers. I guess I don't know. Mm-hmm. 10's also a big number. 10 Commandments, 10 plagues.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's a big one too.
Yeah.
3, 7, 10. Those are big numbers. 4 is good. Is a big number around Passover, but that's worth talking about. It's a class in itself, like Jewish numbers and the symbolism behind them. We have one today actually. Number 7 is pretty prevalent in Let me see, in two of these. This and this. Does anybody know where 7 appears in Jewish wedding?
7, there's 7 blessings.
7 blessings, yeah.
And you circle them 7
times.
times.
7 times they
Yeah.
walk around.
Yeah, circling 7 times. What about?
7 days of Shiva.
Yeah, 7 days of Shiva.
Exactly.
Used to be.
7 days of Shiva. Okay, so we'll talk about that. 7 days of mourning. There's 7 days in which you do that. Yeah.
Isn't today the 7th of Tibet or something? Isn't there
It's the 9th. Oh, tonight's the 10th, really. This is the 10th. Oh, it's the 10th, you see? It's back again. All right. Tomorrow is actually... Anyway, let's keep going. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. Mishpacha. We are one big mishpacha. We're a big family. Okay, mishpacha in Hebrew, pronounced mishpacha sometimes. That's the idea that means family, and all these events, they're involved with family. The family's connected to them. A mitzvah. So most people know what that means, but it's often when it's used in common discourse, it's, can you do me a mitzvah? Can you do me a good favor? It's not necessarily always the 613 commandments. Please do this mitzvah for me really quickly. Clean my car. Do my dishes. No, it's kind of like people use the word mitzvah in that way. Number 36 is Parshat HaShavua. Okay, that's the Torah portion of the week. Parasha is the portion HaShavua of the week, and every week has a Torah portion that we read, and it's divided into 54 portions, and we read them throughout the whole year, and you finish the whole Torah that way. So bar mitzvah, when their bar mitzvah falls on a certain Shabbat, that'll be a Shabbat which has a certain parsha, and one of the 54 parshas. So it's called Parshat HaShavua. And there's laws that say you're really supposed to review the Parshat HaShavua every week, so you know you're ready for when you come in. You're really supposed to read it twice and then read some sort of commentary on it. And people were really careful that when I was in seminary to do that, because it helps you prepare for the Sabbath. And when you're reading the Torah, you're not just talking the whole time. You actually you're like in the reading, and you know what's going on. All right, 2 more. So number 40, Sefer Torah. Okay, that's a well-known one. Sefer means book or scroll. Torah is Torah. So that's the Torah scroll. And lastly, 48 is Yartzeit, and that's 48. And that's the anniversary per the Jewish calendar of a person's death. Okay, so that's connected again to mourning. Those are 10 more phrases that are good to know. Any questions on those? Or?
What do they do in the leap year? Do you do the Torah in the leap year? Do you have a leap month?
Yeah, so you stretch it. They have. Trust me, the rabbis have all these ways to.
Double portions.
Yeah, you have double portions, and you stretch them out. Yeah.
Is Lane only reading from the Torah? It's not in the studying.
No, learning will be more the word you use. Yeah, learning is more for way I've heard it used is for reading from the Torah in the synagogue. Okay, good. So that's that. I'd like to move on now. Topics today we're going to do. We're going to have an Airbnb. We're going to have a B&B, not an Airbnb. Birth and bar bat mitzvah. Brit milah, baby naming, with bar bat mitzvah. I put these all together because we're not going to go too in depth into them because these are more weighty ones. The Jewish wedding and death and shiva customs. So I put them all together. So these should probably take equal time, I think. So that's kind of what we're going to go into. This is basically. From birth to death, this is every part of Jewish life has some sort of a custom or some sort of way to sanctify it, elevate it, and make it more meaningful. That's really Judaism and religion in general. That's what they're big on is making life more meaningful and imbuing it with deeper meaning and importance. So we're going to see how Judaism does that with the different time periods in that person's life. Okay, so. We're at the Brit Milah, okay? So, first question is, what does the word Brit Milah mean? Anybody know? The word Brit means covenant in Hebrew, and Milah means to cut. Yeah. So it's the covenant of the cutting, basically. So that's literally what Brit Milah means. And the question is, why do we do it? Why? I'm not going to go into details of the Brit Milah here. spare you those details. But the technicalities of it. we're not really going to go into that as much. It's kind of just like a more broad discussion. But the Brit Milah is the circumcision when you remove the foreskin of a baby. What day do we do it?
7.
So it's the 8th day.
8.
Okay. And we're going to, it's on the answers on the board. And so the question is, why do we do it? So one answer that I saw, which I thought was somewhat, well, first off, the Torah says you should do it. Okay, so that's the answer. That's the easiest answer with anything. Whenever you don't know an answer, you just say the Torah said. No, but there obviously are deeper answers. So this is one. This is what the Torah says about the covenant. And whenever a covenant is made in the Torah, a covenant literally means when someone makes a covenant in biblical times, there are two sides that are committing to doing something. That's a covenant. So God's committing something to Abraham, and God wants something in return from Abraham. And so God's side of the deal is my covenant with you. God's saying, you shall become the father of a multitude of nations. Your name shall be no longer called Abram. It should be called Abraham. And I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I'll make you into nations. King will emerge from you. Basically saying, I will be there for you. I'll make you nations. Kings will emerge from you, etc. And then God said, Abraham, this is what I want from you, though. You shall keep my covenant, you and your seed after you, throughout the generations. This is my covenant. What's the covenant? Which you shall observe between me and between you and between your seed after you, that every male among you be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be as a sign of a covenant between me and you. Between me and between you. So that sounds kind of like not so parallel, right? God's saying, I'm going to create you. I'm going to make you all the multitude of nations, exceedingly fruitful. Kings will emerge from you. And what's the other side of the agreement? You just have to circumcise yourself. So it seems like that's not. Maybe it's a little painful for a certain period of time, but in the end, it seems like that's a good deal for Abraham or his progeny. But I think on a deeper level, and this goes back to why we do Brit Milah, is I think what the Brit Milah basically symbolizes is that God wants Abraham to sanctify his life and to devote it to God, and especially in the place where can be the most potential for life. It can be the most potential for also bad things or forbidden like sexual relationships. And God says, if you're able, not just on your Brit Milah, but in general in life, you're able to sanctify sanctify yourself, your intentions to me, and not fall prey to your physical lusts and drives, and you'll live a life like that, and your children will, then you'll be worthy of getting all the blessings that I want to get. So it really symbolizes removing oneself from lust, excess, because in Maimonides says that they understood the foreskin to be to add more pleasure in sexual experience, and so if you remove that, it symbolizes that your intention in engaging in physical pursuits is for the sake of heaven and not for only for like physical lusts and drives. We want to live a more elevated, sanctified life. And so that's, I think, the deeper explanation for the covenant. It's not just that it's like a snip and you're done, but rather it's more you're sanctifying your whole life to God. Okay, so that's kind of, I think that's one of the good explanations, I think, for why we do it. If you Google Wikipedia, hi, hey, Sean, sorry, how you doing? If you go on Wikipedia and look up circumcision, they have like 15 other answers, but I thought that was a nice one. Now, why on the 8th day? So, because the Torah said to do it on the 8th day. Good, you're already learning. But the 8th day, there are two explanations that are offered for that. So one is that the natural, who mentioned 7? You mentioned 7, right? So the natural world is a cycle of 7 days, 7 days of creation. So the 8th day is the same idea. The 8th day is a day beyond that. And it's the same idea. We want to elevate ourselves above our physical drives, our natural selves. And that's what we're doing with the Brit Milah. And that's a whole like model of what the Jewish people are supposed to be doing. So that's one explanation for 8. Another one is that, this is like another like an interesting one. When you enter the baby into the covenant with God, we want the baby to go through one Sabbath. Okay, so in order to get through one Sabbath, you at least have to have 7 days. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was born. Let's say it was born on Sabbath. Well, so it should be on the 7th day, really, right?
I was going to say, what if the 8th day falls on Shabbos? Would that be considered work, removing the foreskin?
Yeah, we do that. We do the Brit Milah on Shabbos.
So
yeah.
we can do
Yeah, you do. It's a good question. Like you do. I have to go back and remember why, but. So that's another thing. You want the baby to the Shabbat is a big day, and it's also like you want the baby when it enters the covenant to be elevated and have that extra exposure to holiness before they enter into the covenant. Those are two reasons that are offered for that. So before we move on, any questions on that? I mean, we didn't really even go over what you do, but that's a whole. That's what people train for that for a long time. Yeah. Okay. That's Brit Milah. Baby name. Okay. But I think on a deeper level, and this goes back to why we do Brit Milah, is I think what the Brit Milah basically symbolizes is that God wants Abraham to sanctify his life and to devote it to God, and especially in the most the place where could be the most potential for life. It can be the most potential for also bad things or forbidden like sexual relationships. And God says, if you're able, not just on your Brit Milah, but in general in life, you're able to sanctify sanctify yourself, your intentions to me, and not fall prey to your physical lusts and drives, and you'll live a life like that, and your children will, then you'll be worthy of getting all the blessings that I want to get. So it really symbolizes removing oneself from lust, excess, because in Maimonides says that they understood the foreskin to be to add more pleasure in sexual experience, and so if you remove that, it symbolizes that your intention in engaging in physical pursuits is for the sake of heaven and not for only for like physical lusts and drives. We want to live a more elevated, sanctified life, and so that's I think the deeper explanation for the covenant. It's not just that it's like a snip and you're done, but rather it's more you're sanctifying your whole life to God. Okay, so that's I think that's one of the good explanations I think for why we do it. If you Google Wikipedia, hi, hey, Sean, sorry, you're good. If you go on Wikipedia and look up circumcision, they have like 15 other answers, but I thought that was a nice one. Now, why on the 8th day? So, because the Torah said to do it on the 8th day. Good, you're already learning. But the 8th day, there are two explanations that are offered for that. So one is that the natural, who mentioned 7? You mentioned 7, right? So the natural world is a cycle of 7 days, 7 days of creation. So the 8th day is the same idea. The 8th day is a day beyond that. And it's the same idea. We want to elevate ourselves above our physical drives, our natural selves. And that's what we're doing with the Brit Milah. And that's a whole model of what the Jewish people are supposed to be doing. So that's one explanation for 8. Another one is that, and this is an interesting one. When you enter the baby into the covenant with God, we want the baby to go through one Sabbath. Okay? So in order to get through one Sabbath, you at least have to have 7 days. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was born, let's say it was born on Sabbath. Well, so it should be on the 7th day, really, right?
I was going to say, what if the 8th day falls on Shabbos? Would that be considered work, removing the foreskin?
Yeah, we do that. We do the Brit Milah on Shabbos.
So
Yeah.
we can do it.
Yeah, you do. It's a good question. Like you do. I have to go back and remember why, but. So that's another thing. You want the baby to the Shabbat is a big day, and it's also like you want the baby when it enters the covenant to be elevated and have that extra exposure to holiness before they enter into the covenant. Those are two reasons that are offered for that. So before we move on, any questions on that? I mean, we didn't really even go over what you do, but that's a whole. That's what people train for that for a long time. Yeah. Okay. That's Brit Milah. Baby name. Okay. So, for males, we have the Brit Milah. For girls, there's a ceremony that you have in the synagogue. You say a certain prayer, and you make a blessing. You have a meal. You make a blessing, and you name the baby a name in the synagogue. So it's called a baby naming. It's called a. It's also called Zeved Habat in Sephardic communities. It's called, there are other names for it. But it's in Sephardic communities, it's been around for a long time. But it was kind of more of a private thing, often in Ashkenazi communities, until the 20th century, where other denominations made it much more public and Orthodoxy kind of followed. And so now it's like a public thing in the synagogue. There's a ceremony around it. And on other denominations, they make even more out of it. They have different customs that they're developing around this baby naming ceremony for girls. They want it to be on par to some extent with what you do for the boys. But so here's just a little bit about baby name, like naming your baby, right? So just just briefly, like what there's some discussion around what you should name your baby. So it started out, people used to name their baby after occasions in biblical times. So you have Noah was named after the fact that God was comforted. So you name him Noah. And there's a lot of names in the Bible that are after that. Like Abraham was going to be the king of many nations, the father of many nations. So they're named after occurrences. But through time, people started getting named after like family members. And the question is, what names are good and what names are not good, based on Jewish tradition. So ideally you're not supposed to name your child after an evil person. So I had a friend. Anybody ever heard of the person, the biblical villain Nimrod? So he's like a biblical villain. And I had a friend named Nimrod in Israel. So apparently his parents didn't listen to that direction. But ideally, like that seems like to be the only limit, based on like traditional, like even like Orthodox Judaism, of what you can't name your child. If you ideally you're not supposed to, but if you do, it's not the end of the world either. Like my friend Nimrod. But somebody asked Rav Cook. So we had a baby naming here like a month ago, and they named the baby 3 names. And so, like, how many names can you name a child? So, someone asked that to Rabbi Cook. He was the first chief rabbi of Israel, and he's like, Moses has 10 names according to tradition. So there's no limit to the amount of names you can give. Some people, so there's no limit to that. Some people like to call children after biblical characters, and the reason is that you want them to kind of continue in the path of the biblical like role models, and kind of like always think about that name. So people do that, but now there are no like limits to what people call their kids, even in Orthodox circles. But people try to call them after positive things. Now here's a question for you: can you name your child after an impure animal? Think about it. If I'm saying think about it, obviously there's probably something more complicated.
Yeah.
What?
Some probably already
What?
give the name.
So a lot of people have, Devorah. What's Devorah? Deborah. And she's a prophetess, she was a judge. Her Devorah literally means bee. So you can't eat a bee, according to strict kosher laws. So there's a dove. Anybody heard of a person named Dove? Mm-hmm. Dove means bears. We don't eat bears. So obviously, you can name your kid after unkosher animals. It's interesting, right? Zev. Anybody heard the name Zev?
Yeah.
Yes, that's another animal in Hebrew. So it's a wolf. So yeah.
So why didn't they name them after somebody alive?
So we didn't get to that. That's the next question. Next question is, so Sephardic Jews from Middle Eastern countries, they do name their kids after people of relatives that are alive. Ashkenazic communities don't, for the most part. Because ideally you're supposed to, so the reasons are not as strong, but the strongest reason I saw was that you want to, there's an ideal naming your children after somebody who passed away. Everyone agrees to that. So if you name them after somebody who's alive, you're basically saying, kind of like we're waiting for you to pass away so they could be named after someone who's passed away. It's like kind of like a superstition around that a little bit. But that's the answer that I saw. So
Just a superstition.
I don't have a superstition. I can't say just. There are a few other reasons that I found not as convincing, but I think it's a combination of the different reasons. That's the strongest one. Yeah, but when something kind of becomes a custom, people and it's many years it's done, you just don't do it. So I don't know.
I was at the Jewish bookstore today and actually picked up the book, the baby naming book, and it was about this thick.
Yeah. So here's on to bar and bar mitzvah. Okay, here's a common misconception: you must read from the Torah in order to become a bar or bar mitzvah. No, you don't. You don't. You become a bar or bar mitzvah when you become 12 or 13. It doesn't depend on what you do or what you don't do. You can wake up in your bed, not go to synagogue, and miss your whole speech, and and not get the presents and everything like that, but you still are bar bat mitzvah. And so it's dependent on your age, not on what you do. Okay. Now, what does bar bat mitzvah mean? Bar bat mitzvah literally, what? Aside from those who are going to our synagogue, you definitely should come here and etc. But what does bar bat mitzvah mean? Bar bat mitzvah literally means a person of mitzvah. So it's bar is a son, literally, bat is a daughter. So now you're becoming a person who does mitzvahs. Now you've always done mitzvahs. You were a kid, you were saying modani, you woke up in the morning like we learned last week, you were saying blessings, but now that was preseason. This is the regular season right now, okay? And now it counts, okay? Your record and playoffs, etc. It all counts towards something. And you want to get to the championships, which is wherever. But so now it counts. Your mitzvahs actually are more weighty, and so that's what bar bat mitzvah means. Now, why at the age of 12 and 13? So 12 and 13 are. This is a time when the child is more mature, more able to understand what they're doing. It could have been 11, it could have been 12 or 13. These are the ages that were established. Women were understood to mature earlier than men, so they're age 12. But the idea is that at this point they can understand what they're doing. And if they can understand what they're doing, they can really become a true bar bat mitzvah, because they can now understand the mitzvah and choose to do it and do it in a full way. Before that, they couldn't really be owning the mitzvah because they didn't have that maturity or that intellectual capacity to understand it. So that's a little bit on bar bat mitzvah. The same thing with tefillin. So boys will put on tefillin, but they don't need the tefillin in order to become bar mitzvah. They do that because now they do the mitzvah, so we give them a mitzvah to do. Okay, so that's a little bit on those three things.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions on that?
Like the last bat mitzvah, like on Shabbos, she didn't read.
That's true.
But the last 3 or 4 have read. How many do you see here at Beth Tfiloh that don't read?
So we had a bat mitzvah this last week where she read a speech, but she didn't read. So it's a complicated thing.
She
So-
went to Genesee school, and I think that's her problem children. I mean,
It's a complicated thing because orthodoxy
Maybe she's not
for women,
capable.
orthodoxy women
She's
don't
not capable.
don't usually go up to the Torah and read in the synagogue, aside from more liberal strict parts of orthodoxy. So in our synagogue, we have some sort of a compromise where she'll come up to the bima, but she will read next week's Torah portion. So it's a way of giving her the center stage, but still abiding by the tradition that's been done for so many years. So this Shabbos, though, the bat mitzvah was here. She read her speech, but she didn't read any Torah portion. So it depends. Again, it's she was a bat mitzvah anyway. They can read, they cannot read. It's not.
But do you see many boys not reading?
No, but I know in Chabad, the Rebbe of Chabad used to say that spend your time in learning the laws that you're going to need to know instead of spending hours upon hours upon hours preparing your parsha, your Torah portion. So they read something else. They read a mimer, which is called a mimer. So I haven't seen boys that don't read something. Some boys will read more, some will read less. But. Okay. We're at Jewish wedding. Okay, we're doing okay here. So so this is going to be the class we're going to talk about wedding and then mourning. So these are Judaism's all about that, really. My students are your job is so depressing. I tell them they're what did you do this week? I was I did a funeral. I was at a shiva. They're that's so depressing, Rabbi. I was yeah, but it was also this Sunday I did a wedding and I met with a couple, and it's really that's what it's like. It's Jewish life is up and down, and you try to bring. Life is like that, yeah, for sure. But the Jewish experience of the customs and in general, we kind of try to insert Jewish Jewish values and spirituality into all those experiences, the ups and downs. And so, a Jewish wedding is obviously one of the happier moments. And I just want to discuss a little bit of what goes on at a Jewish wedding, okay, or a traditional Jewish wedding, okay, and then you can. Figure out which pieces are used in other denominational weddings. But this is kind of just the structure of a basic Jewish wedding. You have, in biblical times, these two parts were separated. So when you had a wedding, we're going to I have a little video clip here, so we're going to see what it is, okay? But I'm just going to give you a little, this is the chuppah, okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So in biblical times, in Talmudic times, there were two periods. A couple would get betrothed, they would get engaged, and then they would wait a year. The husband would learn and whatnot. They have a big party at the engagement, then they wait a year, then they would get married officially. But once they got betrothed, this is called kiddushin. Kiddush means sanctified. They were sanctified to each other, so they couldn't. They were dedicated to each other, but to the exclusion of everybody else. They could be with nobody else. So they would wait a year. They would wait a year. He would go learn, and etc. Maybe they would get money together, and then a year later they would get married, and they could finally be with each other. So today we don't do that. They put them together. Some people say because for different reasons, but one was just some families it was too expensive for them to have these two lavish parties, so they put them together. And today our wedding ceremony is made up of these two parts, the kiddushin and the nisuin. And in order to break them up, to retain what we did, what would happen in the old days, we read the ketubah in between. So you ever been at a wedding where you see them reading Aramaic and nobody knows what they're talking about? All of a sudden, they're reading it. The only thing you understand is the names that they read out. You know what I'm talking about? So that's what's going on. You have the kiddushin, which is the ring ceremony, and the two blessings and the wine. Then you'll have a ketubah reading, and at this point the rabbi will speak or whatnot, because this is the intermission kind of. Then you have the actual marriage ceremony, which is the 7 blessings, and that's under the chuppah. And so we'll talk about the different parts, but that's kind of just the general structure of it. And if you understand that, you kind of understand what's going on at a Jewish wedding. There's really 2 parts that were made into one, and a part was added in between to separate between them. That's kind of what's going on at a Jewish wedding. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here was the first part, kiddushin. Okay. Okay. Mazel tov. Okay, so what's going on right now. So first off, I can't pause it that way apparently. Sneaky this thing. There it is. First thing, one of the it's a big command, big mitzvah, a very meritorious thing to bring joy to the bride and groom. It's considered it's even written down, so people put extra effort into doing that. And so if you're sitting on the sidelines, you're watching a wedding, it's good to get in there because it's considered a very meritorious thing to make it as happy as possible. So that's what's happening here. Now at this point they're escorting the. Oops. Gosh. Sneaky.
I think it's a scroll.
So at this point, they're escorting the groom to the bride. Sorry. Let me just do it like this. Okay. They escorted the groom to the bride. Now the bride's sitting in the bridal throne or chair. What's happening right now? What part of the ceremony is this? Badekin. What? You're on a roll today. Tonight. So this is the badekin. It's called Badeken. Badekin. And this is a ceremony that's done in traditional communities where the groom will cover the bride with a veil. Okay, and this is connected to the biblical story with Rachel and Leah, and that we want to make sure. Well, want to make sure it's the right one. That's one explanation to it. But on a deeper level, it's to symbolize that their connection is beyond the physical. It's something spiritual, something eternal, and that's one of the reasons why they do that. And so at this point, the groom will come over. The parents will bless them. Maybe sometimes the grandparents too. And he'll do the ceremony where badekin is I think it comes from badika, is to check, and he'll put a veil over her, and in some Hasidic communities the veil will stay there on her because I don't know, but we don't do that really today.
Didn't you also say it was the ring ceremony too?
Ring ceremony is going to come. Okay, right now we are in not just the preseason. We are like this isn't the. We are now in the preseason of the wedding. Okay, this is like the prelude to the wedding. The kiddushin hasn't started yet. Okay, this is before the kiddushin. This is what happens before they do the checking. You sign the ketubah. We'll talk about the ketubah in a moment. The ketubah, the document, and you'll sign the ketubah. You have a wedding vort, or sometimes the two mothers will break a plate. We're not really talking about that too much, but right now I just want to show you one thing that happens before kiddushin. Before the first stage, it's called the badekin. So if you'll pay attention, I'll just point out, like at this point in strictly Orthodox communities, like the bride and groom aren't touching each other at this point. And so this is her father probably blessing her. There's a custom also to not see each other in some in some Orthodox communities, like for the full week before you get married, because you want to build up the suspense. You want to. So some people do it just the day of. All right, so these are people blessing her. Okay, so now they're going to escort her to the chuppah. That's Yossi and no, just joking. Here, so I just want to say a thing. I'm doing this. I'm going to teach you about the wedding through the video. Okay, so we're just going to talk about different parts. So the chuppah. Here's a chuppah. Now the chuppah in biblical times, people one of the ways that people would affect the marriage is they would enter into a new home together. So that's really what the chuppah is. The chuppah is them entering into a new home. We do the 7 blessings, the third part of the wedding, in the chuppah for that reason. Because that's when you're actually getting married. It's going to simulate a home, and them entering into a home. And it's like an important thing of the wedding, an important part of the wedding. It's a component where they're like you need to have a chuppah. We had a wedding here this last week, where it was So we had a wedding here this week, and some people here were at the wedding, and we had a chuppah, a makeshift chuppah, where we had like 4 poles and all you need really is 4 poles and a covering, a sheet on top, and that can serve as a chuppah, kind of like a makeshift home, and the couple gets married underneath the chuppah. So it's but you have more elaborate ones too, and more fancy ones. This is. All right. Okay, so now he gets escorted. She gets escorted. So. Oh, you missed it. I think there was a circle here. All right. So she's circling the groom how many times? 7 times. So why does she do that? There are different reasons why that happens, but one is that it's kind of like to show ownership, or like that you are each other's. She is just like he's going to give her a ring. She's going to encircle him, and the idea is that they are each, like when you mark your area, she's marking that he is hers and she is his. Kind of like that's one way to understand it. Another way is that in the Bible, in biblical times, in the walls of Jericho, there was in the book of Joshua, they were able to conquer a location called Jericho by encircling it 7 times. After they did that, all the walls fell down. And we want to show that we're entering into a marriage, and we're going to try to remove our walls that distance us between each other, that might distance between the couple, form a distance. There are other Kabbalistic reasons behind it. It's a Kabbalistic custom. If you don't encircle, doesn't matter. If you don't do a badekin, you can still get married. Okay, these are certain customs that develop it. People are pretty careful with them. Okay. Okay. So this is the actual kiddushin. So the person who's running the wedding, which is oftentimes the rabbi, he will make 2 blessings, and another blessing. And then the bride and groom will drink from the wine. This is the kiddushin. It's only 2 blessings. And then you have the ring ceremony. And the ring ceremony is really important. Okay, the ring ceremony is basically the husband giving over some sort of property to the wife, and through that he's affecting the connection between them, and that's really this is the stage where he's saying, I'm giving you this ring, and through this we are dedicated to each other to the exclusion of everybody else. But they're not united yet. They only become united when they enter into the chuppah at the last part of the ceremony, which is the nisuin. So right now he's basically saying, he's going to say, Harayat mekudeshetli, you are sanctified to me, meaning and to nobody else, with this ring. And that's what he says, Harayat mekudeshetli b'tarat zo kedat Moshe b'Yisrael, and to the exclusion of everybody else. And that's what they do. And you have two witnesses who witness this.
So he doesn't really have to get a ring.
No, according to strict traditional law, he doesn't have to get a ring. Now, some people incorporate it into the marriage ceremony, but this is how it was traditionally done. So, and it's this is the two blessings, and now they'll drink, and then we'll have the ring ceremony. And this is the intermission. Okay, this is the reading from the ketubah. Okay.
Why on the index finger?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah.
I thought it was explained to me that there's some artery that runs to the heart.
Oh, yeah, I think I have heard that.
That could
Yeah.
be some,
I think I've heard that.
total whatever, but
Okay.
that's how it was explained to me when I got married. When I asked the same
I
question.
think I remember that too.
So let's do it. Okay, so in between you have the ketubah reading, and I just want to make something clear. Someone can get married. The sages instituted, according to most opinions, to have a ketubah. The ketubah is a document which is basically if the couple does get divorced, this provides for the wife afterwards. This is kind of like this is to protect the woman's rights and to enable her to have support after, if God forbid they get divorced. That's really what and it also is commitments of the husband to the wife in the marriage. It's kind of like all of his commitments to her before, and God forbid if the marriage does dissolve. And so this is instituted by the rabbis. But if you don't have you can get married even without the ketubah. But the ketubah is a really important thing in the sense that it just shows that the husband's commitments to the wife, and it's basically the idea that it's people hang it on their walls to show that they're committed to each other for the most part.
So here's a question. That's basically the Jewish marriage contract, but here in Maryland, do they also require? So they require.
You do both, yeah.
For Maryland.
Yeah.
But now, what happens like if it goes south and won't she have to get a get to get out of the marriage?
Mm-hmm.
And what if he doesn't want to give it to her?
That's for another class. Yeah. That's some heavy stuff there. Yeah. That's a good question. So I just wanted to, and they come in all kinds of shapes and forms, but the rabbi will usually have some sort of template, and he'll plug in the information that is provided to him from the couple, and then they'll send it over to the printer and get the tuba together. So here's the last part, okay? This is another wedding. I just wanted to show you like a different flavor. This is a different chuppah. Again, you have the 4 poles and you have the cover. And these are the 7 blessings. So we're not going to... Sorry, So this is different blessings. They call up 7 different people, and there's 7 different blessings. And the blessings talk about, this is for another class, but the blessings really talk about what a good marriage is. So this is, I'm going to put this in. I gave it like a 7-minute Dvar Torah on this at the synagogue. I'll put this in the folder. So kind of like I'll also put in the blessings themselves, the translations to them. Mm-hmm. So you'll have that, and it's basically the 7 blessings are basically what constitutes a positive and a good marriage, and what kind of ideals do you want to live as a couple, as a Jewish couple. And so, what you're supposed to do when you're under the chuppah and you have this last part of the marriage, you have the actual consummation of the marriage. So you want to talk about that so you can frame the way that things are going to be for years to come, hopefully. And so I'll send you that, and I'll send you the explanation for that. But one last thing, I don't know if they're going to have it here. There's the breaking of the glass. I don't know if they're going to have it. But the breaking of the glass. Why do we break the glass? Anybody? So, at the end of the marriage, at the end of the nisuin, the couple breaks a glass. Now, usually, and the husband will say, or someone will recite a verse from the Bible, and the question is, why do we do that? Anybody know?
To remember the destruction. In the midst of all your joy, you should remember the destruction of the temple.
Yes. So that's one explanation. That amidst all your joy, that it's the world, that the temple's still destroyed, and we should remember that. On another level, people explain it that amidst all of our joy, we still want to remember that the world still needs to be rectified, and we want to bring this joy with us going into the marriage, and so our marriage will be one of involvement in correcting the world and fixing things through our union. That's kind of like another way to understand it. So we break something at that moment to remember that things aren't complete, and we want to take this moment forward with us to complete the world, to make it a better place. Okay, so that's kind of like, any questions on the Jewish marriage or thing you thought about before, or
Okay, sometimes, I don't know, after the marriage, they have like blessing, and they doing some kind of...
yeah. So after the marriage, they'll do another 7 blessings at the meal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they'll do that, and often they'll do that the whole week, actually, if they can.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's continuing the celebration.
Mm-hmm.
But, any other questions on Jewish marriage? All right. Yeah.
I assume it's just custom passed down over time with the various dances and
The horas
the
and
horror and things that they occur. And it seems to be mostly at weddings, but I guess there's other events that they're traditionally.
yeah, it's the things that were just passed on through generations. Certain songs that are played. Yeah, there's no strict rules to that, but on Sabbath there are different songs that are sung traditionally at different meals, and so people are really, even to that extent, so we're kind of careful with that. Once when I first became like religious, I really liked one of the songs that's sung in the day, and I sang it in the night. Like, you're not supposed to sing that; it's the nighttime. I was like, what? So some people are kind of really careful with these things. I guess after a while you associate certain events with certain songs, and you want to hear them at those. I don't know, it's like if you came to Passover and you're starting to sing Berosh Hashanah Yikatim. I don't know, it wouldn't be the same thing. So okay, so we are moving on to death and Shiva customs. Okay. Why is the mourning period called Shiva?
7. Shiva is for 7.
Mm-hmm. So Shiva literally means 7, and there are 7 days that people traditionally mourn. Okay, so that's why it's called Shiva. You're sitting Shiva. People say you're sitting Shiva because usually you sit on a lower stool or something like that when you're in mourning. So you're sitting for 7 days. Okay, that's why it's called Shiva. And the Shiva actually starts the day right after burial. So the first day of the Shiva is counted. Let's say someone gets buried at 3, and sunset is at like sunset is like 5 o'clock. So that's considered a day of Shiva. Okay, so some people are that's considered your first day, and then you have another 6. That's how people count it. And the last day of Shiva is also like. So another time. But so for whom do we mourn? So it's also another 7. There are 7 family members that we mourn for, that you actually officially sit Shiva for. So can we name them? So let's do what? Let's get
Parents, children.
parent. So parent, that's
Children,
2.
2 grandparents, 4 grandparents,
Stuff.
6.
The child.
So it's actually not grandparents.
Huh?
You don't officially sit Shiva for your grandparents. You can. The more you do to give honor to somebody who passed away, that's good. But officially, one is like obligated in Jewish law to sit Shiva only for 7 relatives: 2 parents, 2 children, sister, brother. That's
Seven.
6, and then spouse 7.
Okay.
So my grandmother passed away in Israel. I was there at the shiva, etc. But I didn't sit shiva. My father was there. He sat shiva with his brothers. But yeah, people. There's a lot of people. It's a big thing to give honor to people who have passed. So people will say Kaddish for different family members, cousins, grandparents. It's good to have somebody saying Kaddish is a prayer that people say for people who have passed away. We could talk a little bit about that in a moment, but really, in terms of like the bottom line obligation is towards those 7 that we mentioned: 2 children, 2 parents, 2 siblings, and spouse. Yeah.
If you have more than 2 children,
So for all the children, boy and girl, whatever. Yeah. So you have to wear black to a funeral. So if you go by this, you do, right? But to a Jewish funeral, you don't have to wear black. Okay, it's like a misconception. It's good to dress modestly. I mean, it's not good to wear like bright pink, right? But you don't have to wear black. But I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it's they do it in other countries besides America. I don't know. But
in other countries it's also very
other
black.
countries. Okay. So if you don't wear black, you're okay, according to whatever. So here's just a few things about different customs around Shiva. This is kind of like our last slide, so we're doing good. So the first thing is, this is the first thing. This is a big thing. One is obligated to recite a blessing for the bad that befalls them, just as one recites a blessing for the good that befalls them. Okay, so Jewish tradition doesn't just recognize God when things go well. We want to train ourselves to recognize that God is there and God is involved and even behind even the bad things that happen. It's kind of hard sometimes to deal with that. I gave a class on that on like why bad things happen to good people. Don't worry, I didn't have there aren't so many perfect answers to that, but we still believe Jewish tradition believes, this is from the Talmud, and that God's there, God's involved, God's behind things that happen. God sees what's going on. God, and we recognize that. And so when a loved one has passed, there is a custom to tear one's clothing. Now, I've been to most of the funerals I've been to here. People will tear a ribbon, but like traditional Jewish law, you're really supposed to mend. What is it? Mend? What is it? Rend. Sorry. Rend. What's the word? Rend. Is that the word? To tear. Let's just tear. It's just to tear a garment that you actually wear. And the reason why is in biblical times, this is what people used to do when they're grieving. They used to tear their clothing. They used to sit on the ground. They used to not be able to talk to anybody. And so we're kind of just simulating that. First, we're giving a place for that, for you to express those emotions and feelings. Now, if people don't do it as much today, we kind of generate it. We go back and we generate it through these behaviors. But this is a way that the sages created space in Jewish custom and ritual for somebody to express those emotions through these customs that were prevalent. So for a parent, one does it on their left side because that's closest to the heart. But for the other ones, they do it on the right side. That's just something to know. That's the tearing. And when someone does that, they'll make a blessing. They'll say that God is the true judge. It's a tough one sometimes for people to say at that moment. But that's kind of, and another thing behind the tearing of the clothing is that we're basically saying that this we have a tear in our lives right now, and no matter how much you try to mend it and fix it, it's never going to look the same. And so we're recognizing that. We're making space for that feeling, that emotion, when someone's doing that. So we can talk a little about funeral and cottage, but I just want to talk about these other pieces here. This is something that we say to mourners. This is a blessing that we say. Okay, Hamakom. You familiar with this? How many people are familiar? You want to just think in general? Okay, so it says this is the blessing that's said to people who are mourning. Okay, So hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar avelei Tzion v'Yushalayim. It literally means, may the omnipresent comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Now, why do we say this specific blessing to people? This is what I usually say at funerals. So I'm just sharing with you what I usually say. It's a unique way of referring to God. The title we give God is Hamakom. Anyone know what Makom means literally in Hebrew? It means place. So have you ever talked to God, called God the place? So you're, oh, the place, please send me a lot of money this week. Oh, the place. You don't talk to God there. God or Hashem or we don't, in Jewish tradition, we don't usually only a few places we refer to God as the place. So why at a funeral do we refer to God as the place? Because oftentimes when somebody's going through the loss of a loved one, they don't have a place. Okay? They're disoriented. Everything they were used to isn't the same as it is anymore. Mm-hmm. They used to call their loved one every day. They used to be in touch with them. They had a connection with them. And in this time of grief and loss, they're disoriented. They don't have a place. And so we want to bless them that God will be their place. That God will fill some of that space in their time of mourning. And we also say that the other mourners of Zion and Yerushalayim, the community will be there for them and help them. And that's why it's a really big thing in Judaism to go to a mourner's home and to be with them. And when you go to somebody's home, you don't even have to say anything. Just being there, you're helping to fill some of that place that's so empty at that time. That's kind of like why we talk of God as the place. So that's a little bit on that. Any thoughts on that, or question?
It's interesting because I've never, you always see Hashem and there's omnipresent.
Yeah, so it literally means...
Very interesting.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Right? And this is what people always say, like even in synagogue. When we have mourners in our synagogue who are visiting in their time of mourning. As a whole community, we will all stand up and say together, Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar avlei. And that's what we're basically saying, that we want to be your place. We want the synagogue to be your place. We're praying that Hashem will be your place. Because they don't really we feel displaced when we're mourning for a loved one. That's like an important blessing that we give. And lastly, in terms of the different pieces, we have the yahrzeit candle. Okay? So it's funny. It's like when I left rabbinical school, I thought I'd be getting asked all the questions that I studied on my rabbinical tests. So it's like we learned about, let's say, a spoon that was you stirred with your milk coffee fell into a meat pot, a pot of chicken soup. What's the law? That's the kind of questions we were studying. Then when I got to the synagogue, the most questions I get is on my vegan diet. That's the most by 10. Seriously. That's like, well, it's vegan, Judaism, where God says you should eat meat. It's a whole spiel. Oh, Rabbi, what can you eat at this Kiddush? And it's like, then the other person, oh, Rabbi, look, you can eat that. So anyway, all right, just airing some of that out. So it's like a shtick. What?
How long have you been a vegan?
Okay, so you see? So we'll address that another time. Maybe I gave a 7-minute thing on why I'm a vegan. Maybe I'll attach that to the folder. Okay. But another thing I get asked is a lot of questions around death and a lot of questions around the candle. So let's just talk about the candle for like a minute or two. So we light a candle. Why do we light the candle? So we light a candle. You're supposed to light it. You light it for like 7 days, of the 7 days of mourning. And one reason why we light it is that we want to. It's the Proverbs say that the soul of man, Ner Hashem, that the candle of God is the soul of man. So our soul is like a candle, according to the Proverbs. It says the Ner Hashem Yishma, the candle of God is the soul of man, or the soul of humans. So we want to say that the soul might not be here, the body might not be here, the person might not be here, but their soul is still with us. They're still with us. We feel them, we experience them. We want to continue living the ideals that they taught us and what they modeled for us in their lives. So we're keeping them alive as if through the candle. That's one explanation that's offered for it. There are a few more.
So how long does the candle burn?
So the candle burns for all 7 days.
Now, I get that, but how long do the candles themselves last?
You can buy one for 7 days.
Oh, so it'll last 7 days?
Yeah. Now, yeah, it's a tall one. Now, people will light one on the year anniversary of their loved one, and they'll light that, and that's another thing that people do again because you want to. So mystically, there's an idea also that the soul is still around during the Shiva, and so I saw in mystical works that the soul is kind of in light and it's connected to light. So there is some sort of mystical connection between the candle and the soul and the presence of the spirit. I don't know how to exactly word that or explain that.
And
but
what happens after 7 days?
So we talked about that, I think, in in the second class. But the soul's still around according to Jewish tradition up until like the full year, and in general, and then we'll conclude with this. But we have the Kaddish that people say. The Kaddish is a special prayer we mentioned in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
This is a prayer that we say for our loved ones, and according to traditional texts, we, in addition to remembering them through the Kaddish and commemorating their memory, we're also elevating them through the Kaddish. And so we're saying a special blessing, a very, very powerful blessing, which is all about God being sanctified in the world. And through us doing one of the best deeds, which is the purpose of Judaism, is to sanctify God's name in the world, we are doing a great deed, and through that we're hoping to elevate their souls. So there is still that idea of the connection between the soul and the individual based on traditional Jewish texts, and we're hoping to elevate them through our Kaddish. That's why people are really careful with it. And that's like a little bit about the life cycle in 1 hour. But the basic idea is that we try to bring meaning. Judaism and religion in general brings meaning to different life experiences, and we want to try to elevate ourselves and to grow amidst happiness and tragedy and everything in between. Thanks.
Thank you.
So next week will be